CIA chief landed in Moscow aboard a C-17 Globemaster, and Washington isn't saying why. No public itinerary, no detailed explanation, no clear answers about who he actually met. And interestingly, the US military plane kept its track the whole time on, which was quite unusual for such a sensitive trip. But here's what makes this visit truly alarming. The last time a US spy chief went to Moscow was in 2021, which was just months before Russia-Ukraine war broke out. Back then, American intelligence had seen something coming. And now, another CIA chief has suddenly appeared in Moscow. So what does America's intelligence agency know that the rest of the world doesn't? Is Russia preparing for a new military mobilization? Is Moscow planning to start a new war? And is Washington trying to stop another war before it actually explodes?
Я вам только могу сказать, что имели место контакты по линии специальных служб.
So in this edition of From the News Desk, we piece together the clues, the intelligence reports, and the theories surrounding CIA's extraordinary Moscow mission. Because behind those closed doors, something was discussed that the world still doesn't know about. So stay with us till the end, because the final possibility could explain why Ratcliffe had to go to Moscow himself. The first and perhaps the most alarming possibility is that Ratcliffe went to Moscow to deliver a very serious warning to Vladimir Putin. According to a report by the Wall Street Journal, US intelligence has indicated that Russia could be preparing for another mobilization which might be designed to test NATO's resolve. And if that intelligence is accurate, Ratcliffe's visit suddenly makes much more sense. The CIA director is not a conventional diplomat. His value to Moscow is the intelligence he can bring to the table. Well, he can tell Russian officials what Washington believes Russia is preparing, and perhaps more importantly, that United States know about it. And there is an historical parallel too. In 2021, then CIA Director William Burns traveled to Moscow as the Biden administration became increasingly convinced that Putin was preparing to invade Ukraine. Burns reportedly warned the Russian leadership about the consequences of such an invasion. And now, another CIA director has arrived in Moscow at another moment of heightened tensions. Well, that does not prove history is repeating itself, but it does raise a chilling possibility. Is Ratcliffe in Moscow because Washington has detected something that it believes could dramatically change the war or even threaten NATO? If that is the reason, this may not have been a peace mission at all. It could have been a message: America knows, America is watching, and don't cross the next red line. Now, the second possibility is considerably more diplomatic, but potentially just as important. Ratcliffe may have traveled to Moscow to help restart negotiations over the Ukraine war. The Trump administration has repeatedly pushed for an end to the conflict, but the peace process has struggled to produce a breakthrough. Russia and Ukraine remain divided over territory, ceasefire conditions, and most importantly, the fundamental terms of a settlement. And Ratcliffe is not a complete outsider to this process. His intelligence role gives him access to sensitive discussions that conventional diplomats may not be able to conduct. Now, one particularly interesting possibility is that Washington could be exploring a limited ceasefire first rather than attempting to immediately solve the entire war. Well, that could mean agreements covering energy, infrastructure, ports, or other targets before moving towards a broader ceasefire. And then comes the biggest clue. Reports say Washington asked Ukraine to avoid strikes against Russia while Ratcliffe was in Moscow. Well, why would Washington make such a request? Well, one obvious explanation is security. But another possibility is that Washington wanted to create a temporary window of calm while sensitive discussions were taking place, and also to give Moscow a message that Ukraine still listens to Washington. Now, there is another theory that may sound less geopolitical but could be far more concrete. Ratcliffe could have traveled to Moscow over the fate of an American prisoner held in Russia. And one name being circulated or discussed is Charles Wayne, an American citizen imprisoned in Russia. Reports circulating in Russian and international media have linked Ratcliffe's visit to the possibility of Wayne's release. And there is precedent for the CIA director becoming involved in sensitive US-Russia detainee negotiations. Under the Trump administration, Ratcliffe has reportedly been involved in high-profile pressure exchange diplomacy between Washington and Moscow. Now that makes this theory particularly interesting, but there is an even more intriguing coincidence. Reports indicate that Russian President Vladimir Putin may have signed a degree potentially connected to Wayne's pardon around the same time as Ratcliffe's visit. However, the details and connection have not been established yet. So perhaps this mysterious trip had a very simple objective. Ratcliffe went to Moscow to negotiate or finalize the release of an American citizen. Now we come to the wild card, Iran. Because Ratcliffe's Moscow trip is happening at a moment when Washington is simultaneously dealing with an escalating confrontation involving Tehran. Well, Russia remains strategically important to Iran and Moscow has maintained close ties with Tehran. Reuters report that the Moscow visit comes amid US pressure on Iran and accusations surrounding Russian assistance to Tehran. Well, obviously, Moscow has denied allegations that it supplied Iran with intelligence such as satellite imagery and has expressed willingness to help mediate the US-Iran confrontation. Well, obviously, that creates another possible explanation. Perhaps Ratcliffe was not traveling to Moscow primarily to discuss Ukraine. Perhaps Washington just wanted to know what is Russia going to do if the Iran confrontation further escalates. Will Moscow provide Iran with intelligence? Will it provide military assistance? Will Russia help Tehran rebuild its capability, or could Putin instead play the role of a mediator? For Washington, these questions are actually critical because the nightmare scenario for Trump administration would be the Ukraine conflict and the Iran war becoming interconnected, creating a wider confrontation involving Russia, Iran, the United States, and potentially NATO. Finally, there is perhaps the biggest possibility of all. Ratcliffe may have gone to Moscow as Trump's secret messenger. Well, the exact purpose of the meetings remain undisclosed. Neither the CIA nor Kremlin has provided details about who Ratcliffe actually met or what was actually discussed. But look at the circumstances. Ukraine peace efforts are stalled, US intelligence is reportedly watching Russian military preparations, and Washington is simultaneously dealing with Iran. Well, that is an extraordinary combination, which raises the possibility that Ratcliffe was carrying something that could not simply be sent through a normal diplomatic channel. Well, it could have been a warning, it could have been an offer, it could have been an intelligence, it could have been a message about Ukraine, it could have been about Iran, or it could have been all of these things at once. So perhaps the real story is not simply why Ratcliffe went to Moscow. Perhaps the real story is that Washington and Moscow are quietly communicating about something the public is not being told yet. And that brings us back to the biggest clue of this entire mystery. The last US spy chief known to travel to Moscow did so in 2021, months before Russia-Ukraine war broke out. And now another US spy chief has suddenly landed in the Russian capital. We still don't know whether he went to deliver a message, negotiate peace, secure an American prisoner, discuss Iran, or carry a message from Donald Trump. But one thing is clear, Washington had a reason to send its top spy to Moscow, and whatever was the reason, the United States clearly did not want the world to know about this very meeting. Until Washington or Moscow reveals what happened behind those closed doors, the mystery remains. But if the intelligence concerns surrounding Russian mobilization and a possible test of NATO are accurate, then this hours-long Moscow trip could later turn out to be much more important than it first appeared. Because sometimes the most important diplomatic meetings are the ones the world is not supposed to see. Well, with that, it's a wrap on today's edition of From the News Desk. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm Yash Goyal signing off for Times Now Digital. Until next time, take care and keep watching this space for more such videos.